Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Table 13. I, of course, am a wooden leg, and over here over there we have Mr. E. Today we are going to talk about something that one of our users on our Discord brought up, and we thought that it was such a good idea, or something that needed to be talked about, that we decided to do a whole episode on it, and that is how to keep players' attention. There's a few aspects to this question, but it kind of boils down to, you're here to roleplay, you're here to take part in this game, and as the DM, especially, you want your players to be like actually doing the thing that you all grouped together to do. So, how do you go about doing that? And what strategies are there? What did we do? Yeah, we're just going to kind of dive into this question. And to start with, Mr. E, you kind of brought up a really good place to begin. So why don't you,
Yeah.
take us away here?
It starts with a lot of stuff that myself and Ahmad, have been speaking about on these the short orders that you'll see
Mm-hmm.
some of
Mm-hmm.
the breaks. But it's the stuff that you go through to build your group before the game gets going. A lot of people, your game's already rolling. This isn't like going to help you session to session necessarily, but I think if you can I guess like from the get go, the most important thing is understand what you enjoy as a DM, right? Like your kind of type of game to play, what you enjoy putting out there and doing and
Right.
focusing on during the sessions, because um, you most DMs are pretty flexible, but most DMs also have like a style or preference for things that'll mesh better with some players than others.
Right.
um, and yeah, and like I guess knowing what you've got, what you enjoy and all that stuff will put you in the right direction to find
Yeah.
the players that will jive with that, I
Absolutely.
suppose.
I guess you don't necessarily want, yeah, or doing it the other way around, which I know that some people don't necessarily have the option to not do that the other way around, but you really do want to find players that fit your DMing style rather than trying to fit your DMing style to the table that you are at, because there is a little give and take, obviously,
Absolutely, yeah.
but you really do, as the DM, it's your, you're the gatekeeper. You allow people or kick people from the table, and so it should be on your terms. And from experience, you want to be, um you want to be invested in your game because it starts with you.
Right.
If you're not
And that's
invested,
that's hard to do if you
yeah.
have to focus on an aspect of the game that you don't enjoy very much
Right.
regularly because you feel like you can't your players won't be engaged if you don't. It's kind of like, yeah, setting yourself up for failure, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then I guess like so that yeah, and then from there the thing we've talked about is in the short orders is kind of surveying your prospective players. I think that that's something that the internet D&D age has made much more
Yeah.
common, but I think it's actually a really great tool um, to just ask some of these basic questions about like how much do you like to role play versus how much do you like to focus, or how often do you want to have combat, like how much do you expect your DM to go rules as written versus rules are cool,
Right.
and maybe some questions that ask some that get you toward finding out if they're the kind of player that enjoys driving the story themselves, or if they want the DM to kind of have a main plot line that's defined that is, the party's kind of following along
Mm-hmm.
with.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of basic things, which leads into, it's make sure that they jive more or less with what you want to provide as a
Right.
DM.
And
And so
each
just,
other too, right?
yeah,
You
right,
like
exactly. Yeah.
in this area, you want to make sure that you're going to have people that at the surface level seem like they're going to get along or seem like they're going to work together.
Yeah,
Um,
that they'll want the same things out of your
right.
game,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
or close,
Yeah.
there's somewhere that there's a middle ground that everybody's going to get a bit of what they're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've found if you are concerned, if you're playing with a bunch of people that you don't know super well, other than what they put into your survey, stack in a ringer, like somebody you know is gonna play the game the way you
Yeah.
want it to, go kind of as a DM. You enjoy them as a player. That'll help direct the party.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you'll be surprised how much like one really strong role player can bring some people who aren't super comfortable with it out of their shells.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Get people
or
taking
or
plays.
yeah, or people who just didn't think they liked that, but hadn't found somebody who did it as well, or in the way that they wanted to engage with, or whatever. So I
Right.
think things like that can help you a ton. Um, yeah, it's just so I think it does start with before even session zero, like forming your group. I think you can
Right.
do a lot of the legwork to keep your party engaged by making sure that you've got an idea of what they're looking for as
Right.
players, and that you want to deliver that as a DM.
Yeah, and they're capable of being engaged, or this group all will, at least like I said, on the surface, jive together and work towards a common goal. Um,
Absolutely.
I've never really been a part of a party where it starts and I'm just like, oh man, this is destined for failure. But I have heard the horror stories where it's just like, yeah, this guy was like an avowed Nazi, and that my best friend was Jewish, and it didn't go down well. Like 2 sessions, and the campaign crumbled.
Super
So
extreme
yeah,
example.
but I've read. I mean, like
Yeah,
go
you're
to
right.
D&D
There are
horror
worse
stories.
things
Yeah,
than that
RPG horror
on the
stories.
RPG horror
Yeah. Oh
spectrum.
my
Yeah.
goodness. Yeah. So
Um,
so you really want to like to engage players or make sure they're engaged. You want to make sure they're capable of that first. And
right.
you'd think we wouldn't have to say it, but make sure that you have people that on the surface are going to get along. You never know how people are going to act in 6 7 sessions, like
Right.
but unless you've role played with them before. But then again, it's yeah, it really comes down to that very beginning. You want to set yourself up for this kind of success. You don't want to shoot yourself in the
Right.
foot by gathering together a group or running a campaign that the group isn't into, or running a
Yeah.
campaign that you're not into. So I think
And
that's
that, yeah,
really
without
those are really good points.
yeah. And then I think kind of leading from that similar sort of stuff, after you've kind of gathered that group, um, you can do a lot of things with the way the character building process, the session zero stuff, um, to try and like tie each of these characters into the setting, whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
homebrew or an established setting that you're using, finding a way to make them feel like they're not strangers in a strange land, regardless of what they're, like despite the fact that they really should have a bunch of connections and people because of their background or whatever.
Yeah.
If you can bring that stuff to the forefront a little more, I think a lot of players will respond positively to that. Not every player, but
Right.
um, if you call out a proper noun from their background or something that they gave you, usually most players will like, oh, hey,
Yeah.
that's for me, kind of thing. So
That's a brings up something that I didn't write down, but it's something that I do often is I involve players in the world building process just enough to get them to put stuff in they can get out later. Which
yeah,
is kind of what your point like you're putting those seeds in by letting them like even if it's something as small as like a town or even like their family, just
right,
have them put down some kind of something that then you can bring back up later in passing role play or in detail that'll get them to perk up and be like, oh yeah, hey, that's for me. Yeah, exactly like
yeah,
that.
yeah. And I think it's important that those things, there's a way for the player to use those connections to benefit them in some way, like at the table usually, or at least if you can find some way that like, oh, they've got a connection to this group of people and that lends
Right.
them this benefit in this situation. And it doesn't have to be any better than like a background feature kind of quality thing.
Right.
um but if you can bring that to something where they get advantage on this kind of check every now and
Mm-hmm.
again, um that'll help players feel like it matters, that they're not just a stat block that rolls checks to solve problems or whatever, that they're like a living
Right.
breathing thing. And then that's stuff you can threaten down the line
Yes.
as a DM that they're invested in because they are beginning to maybe rely on that benefit regularly or something.
Something that you also mentioned that I kind of want to circle that back to a little bit
Sure.
is the stranger in the strange land thing. Because while
Hmm.
backstories are important for that, you also want to make sure your setting is something that role players have like the ability to imagine themselves in, or like have the ability to like visually picture in their head in a way that's not confusing or isn't inconsistent among role players. An example that I have from my history is I built like a setting that took place inside a giant space computer that was like flying through empty space. And so the wildlife and stuff was like computer based. You know, I wanted to make like an ecosystem of like these computer animals and stuff that were doing things to keep the computer working, and still make like create an ecosystem. And so these people lived on like chips that were like intersections of large banks of chords and stuff. But I found that it was really hard for the role players to picture it in their head in a way that they actually felt like they were there, or picture it in their
Right.
head
Yeah.
in a way that they all agreed on what they were looking at when I described something. Because it was, and this is kind of a fringe case. I don't run into very many people that are like,
I see what
oh,
you mean,
but
though.
yeah, it's, you're not going to get role players invested if they can't imagine what's going on around them in a way that they all agree with. If you're like, oh yeah, there's these Schloggoth creatures that have like, you know, like shifting faces and stuff, and they all the role players like describe that to me now, and they all give you
Yeah.
different descriptions. You're not going to have a very cohesive party, and you're not going to have people that are really into the thing. And you know, again, there are like, you know, special cases where
Right. If it's
in
like
a
a chaos demon or
right, but
something,
that's like in a
whatever. All right.
setting that
Right.
people can understand. But if everything is chaos, you can't, or everything is
Absolutely.
so weird that role players don't have really any real world experience to ground themselves in the story. It's hard for them to be invested. It's hard for them to pay attention. Um, because really, like at the end of the day, you want to trick people into paying attention to what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know, you
That's
want them to pay attention in spite of themselves.
Yeah, you
Um,
suck them into like I mean obviously yeah, the ideal case is that you have a person who's very like diligent and attentive and that's the best case scenario for players,
right.
but I mean this is a casual activity we're all doing for fun and we're all human. So some days people won't be on their best or whatever, Reddit will be too tempting or
Right.
something like that. Uh and things like this, I think, yeah, like you're saying, you can suck them in spite of themselves because they're worried about
Yeah.
if I miss this detail, I won't be able to benefit from it in the future. And if you can, I think that's like one of those things that
Yeah.
outside of the background, even further down the line, you can yeah kind
Yeah.
of get that stuff to
Yeah.
help
Because
you.
I mean, from just what we've discussed, if you took none of this advice and you built a player base based on like antagonistic people that really didn't like each other, based in a world where everything was just a chaos shifting realm of strange
Mush,
shapes of mush and
gloops, or whatever that one race was.
yeah, gloops, yep. And nobody had any backstories with which you could reference, and they were all just walking stat blocks. I don't see very much player retention just right off the bat. Um,
Unless it's like everybody there is totally in it for the
right.
combat. They don't care about the RP stuff as much. And it's
Yep.
basically, this is a war game where you guys are um, kind of jumping from one arena combat to the
Yep.
next or something similar to that.
But that
Hey,
just goes
all
back
right.
into knowing who you're role playing
Exactly.
with. If you,
The odds that you're
yeah,
going to find six people who are all looking for that game, without making sure,
right.
is pretty low.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to stick your hand in and pull out 6 role players from the grab bag that all agree on what they want in a role playing game. You're going to have to do some
No
work.
matter what that
Yeah,
is.
exactly. You're gonna have to do some work to cultivate your groups. And hey, there's this Discord group that I've heard about that really helps in
Nice.
facilitating
Good plug.
groups.
Go
That
ahead.
yeah,
Yeah.
that
Solid.
yeah, that's a rational radio. that the symbol's
Pretty
right.
sure there are like links down below that
Yeah,
you can
links down
click
below.
on.
Yep. So yeah, quick plug. If you guys are watching this and you're like,
Yeah.
man, that sounds
Probably the
great,
first of many that's coming
right?
up here.
But yeah. So that's kind of what we want to do at Irrational Radio is facilitate people being able to meet people, know them in a social sense, then be able to role play with them. So you can really build groups that you know these people. They're like real people. You've seen what they've eaten for dinner. You know what they make on their spare time.
That's true. There's a chance of that.
Yeah, so you can really get to know them before you want to spend 3 hours a
See their
week with
cat.
them. Yeah, see their cat. There's a lot of cats on this Discord. But yeah, that's
Um,
that's the idea. Is that really does help group cohesion, and group
yeah,
cohesion really helps people stay invested in what's going on. They
I
keeps
would
them
say
away
that's
from their phone. Yeah.
something else. Is yeah, as someone who grew up before the era of internet D&D, as my old fogey ass did, um, I I would say that that's something that's very different. That it matters a lot when if you're not playing with people you know outside of the game. Um, that the interpersonal chemistry of the party has way more to do with it than anything you're going to do as a DM
Yeah,
for keeping a group together. I feel like so. Yeah, that's
absolutely.
go back to why stress all the stuff that you do before you even started the game, which I'm sure
Yep.
is not really what they were asking about.
No, but I
Uh,
think it still
it's
is
important
important.
information to
Yeah,
include.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But okay, so let's say you've gotten your group together, you've gotten your world set. It doesn't. It's a standard fantasy setting. How do you keep your role players invested in the game itself? Because you can do all these things right and still have half your party on their cell phones for most of the session.
Absolutely.
And so this is kind of where I went when I was preparing for this question. In that, you know, as an experienced DM, I kind of have identified where people tend to leave the like immersion. And
Check out or
yeah,
whatever.
check out. The biggest thing is splitting the party. That is, I think, one of the easiest ways to get people to not pay attention. And it's not necessarily every splitting the party, but if you split the party and half the group is like staying in the inn and the other half is going to go
Hmm.
do the plot point, or if you have like one group that's just going to watch camp while the other group plays scouts ahead, you're going to end up with the asymmetric like, oh, they're having combat and we're going to cut back to the caravan and oh, we're still just
Playing
playing
cards
cards.
or
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
whatever it is that's I yeah, that is a splitting the party is a juggling act for sure.
Yes.
To get it successfully, I would say that my go-to whenever I do that, um, I try not to put the players in a position where they feel they need to leave one of the party
Mm-hmm.
members to do a menial, mundane, boring task, like just keep an eye on something, unless I have something suitably exciting happening
Right.
that I figure I can pull out and chuck at them as well. Um, so you throw an extra NPC or that follows them around and is willing, is loyal to them that they can rely on to serve these sort of mundane purposes
Mm-hmm.
or a network of these kinds of cohort types if you can, and I generally will. Um, but the because that's if you can keep that from happening, then the whole party can go do the fun thing,
Right.
or the more exciting,
Yes.
intensive thing, and keeping the party together, even if half the party is just waiting back while the sneaky pair goes in to scout it out or something. You can start to juggle back and forth a little easier because you're not jumping across town or whatever. There's you can share events, and I guess actually that's one of the things that I like to do really,
Yes.
is the handoff, uh, finding some common thing
Mm-hmm.
that both groups will notice, um, and using that as sort of like a milestone, saying,
Right.
"Okay, we're about 2 minutes from when the barkeep shouts, 'You get out of here! I can't take this anymore.' So we'll wind back and go, back to the other group, and then after they've done X, bartender say, 'You
Right.
get out of here!' Yeah, blah blah blah," and then you cut back and if you
Yes.
can do that, make it feel like a Tarantino movie or something, people, it's more fun, it's more engaging, and the
Yeah.
party is like, oh crap, yeah, what they're doing affects me, so I have to pay attention, even when I'm not the one who's maybe
Right.
directly acting at the moment or whatever.
And I think that that also kind of speaks to you want to have both groups engaged in some kind of activity.
Right.
Even if they're like, oh, we're gonna stay back and like just hang out at the campfire or like prepare dinner or something. You want to make you want to create some kind of conflict, even a small bit of conflict that
Yeah.
allows you to cut back to them and be like, okay, so you're still looking for the eggs for dinner. Where are they? You know, like it
Even
just
if it's that mundane, or
yes.
or it's some little piddly argument or something about whatever, that somebody starts some crap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the NPCs pick nits with them about how they handled the last mission or something, and like, yeah, even if it's mundane and little like that, something to just go back and check in and be like,
Right.
hey, we're still doing, you're still here. I'm still paying attention. I haven't forgotten that you're
Yes.
players in this game or whatever.
And you
Because I've
really
totally screwed the whole group because I let one player run combat the entire session or something because it was just
yeah.
like, oh crap. Now what do
I
I do?
wasn't gonna mention that, but that is
Oh,
definitely one of
it's
the
a
things
perfect
that
example of what you want to avoid. Like
yeah,
I was
yeah,
like
yeah,
dying the whole time, like, oh my God. But like I could have hand waved it through and been like, whatever, okay, you guys get there and all that stuff. I probably should have, but I just, I didn't. And looking back, yeah, that's you lose everybody who's not directly engaged for
right.
more than like half an hour.
Yeah, I was gonna
So
say like I had half an hour into that session, I had booted up a video game and I was just like checking back the roll 20. Up, yep,
yeah,
Wesker's still alive. Yep, look at
still
that.
not
Yep,
dead, and yeah,
I'm
and
still
that's
running. Yeah, on my turn, I'm dashing. All
yeah,
right. Yep.
it's like, and
Just let me
that's
know.
if
Yeah.
you do that, you just yeah, you want to avoid situations where you're putting your one player in the spotlight for the whole damn session,
Right.
obviously.
Right.
But I would say the other side of that though, if you don't have something that's super important planned, um, that like you can just breeze over that stuff as long as there isn't anything that the players are really desperately trying to accomplish.
Right.
If it will abbreviate the like task that the two that the other party are trying to complete, if you can knock
Right.
that out in 10 minutes, then maybe you don't have to switch back
Right.
to the other group. You can just say, okay, you kept an eye on things were cool. Have them do a couple perception checks and describe them seeing some weird stuff, maybe, and give them a chance to maybe engage in something. But if they don't, it doesn't. Yeah, I think you can do yourself just as much harm if you're cutting out of, I guess, like a high intensity moment to go back to argue about the eggs or something,
Yes.
for
Yes.
example. If that's not done well, I think that
Yeah.
helps a ton. If you've been going 30 minutes, you need to go back and do something with the other
Yeah.
people.
And I would
Um,
say 30 minutes has been way too long. You want to keep that down
right.
into like less than 10 minutes between groups.
Probably,
And
yeah,
if you
10,
can
15.
and that's so this is a little bit of meta knowledge that I hope no role players of mine listening to know this, but I tend to make things or like events that happen when parties are split easier to resolve than when the party is together. So
Oh
an
yeah.
example of this is like if the whole party goes to find, this ingredient that they need for a potion that they desperately need to make to cure something for some NPC or something like that. If they all go together, I might have the shopkeeper go like, "Oh, I had it, but I need to cross town. This guy is doing this thing with this other person, like extend it a little bit longer. Whereas if they were split up, I would just be like, okay, so you go to the shop and you buy the ingredient, and now we're here. Um,
Yeah, you guys meet back up after the other group
right,
grabs this thing that they were trying to
because
purchase. Like, yeah,
then you allow the party to be split, but it's more like a montage of the party being split rather than a cut to a scene with a singular player character or two or three of your party. You want to, and that's the big thing too, I think, is you want to keep kind of the time that you look at each of role player, and what I mean look at, like, move the spotlight towards, you want to
Yeah.
keep it reasonably consistent. You don't want to constantly be giving one person more agency or more chances to act than other people, unless that's just your table,
Yeah, I
because
think there are
yeah,
going to be tables, yeah, where there's one person who's by default sort of taking the
yeah,
initiative and directing the party's action sometimes. But I think as a DM, especially in those parties, you want to make sure that you're um, either dropping hooks that directly engage one of the other players every now and again, that you're directly talking to the other players, checking in, making sure that, like, seeing what
yeah,
their opinion is on stuff, if that's not a conversation that's happening, because you don't want one player just steamrolling everybody
right,
else. Uh, but I think, yeah, there's going to be table dynamics where there is sort of like a leader who
yeah.
tends to sort of direct the action most of the time.
And something I also wanted to talk about in this space here is, if you're a player, um, take what you know, what we're giving you here, and, like, I've had players step in almost and be like, "Hey, this person hasn't talked. What do you think?" Like, turning towards them
Right.
and involving them in role play, because either they haven't gotten a say or they haven't been very talkative, and just giving people that space to role play with you rather than just constantly hogging the spotlight. So as a player, you also kind of want to be mindful of this as well, because you can really help your DM engage the rest of the party if you are also trying to engage the rest of the party.
Absolutely.
Um, and that's as the DM, you really don't have a say in how your players interact with each other, but as a party member, I do think that doing that really does lend itself to better parties, more cohesive parties, because then people don't
Absolutely.
feel like, oh, if I don't force myself into the front, I'm not going to get a chance to speak. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I think that that's something that people can like kind of take away as
Hmm.
players themselves. It's just like, if you notice that someone hasn't really gotten to talk, or if they're being quiet, just in character turn to them and crack a joke, or turn to them and ask them
Yeah.
about their situation, um like what their perspective on what's going on or
Yeah.
something in
Just
character.
make an effort to draw their character
Right,
into whatever you're doing, and as a DM, you can do the same thing. Sort of like, okay, so while this is going on, what is your character
right,
doing, or what does so and so think about this conversation, or you know again, I think, yeah, one of the best ways to do that is have somebody, the hook that directly addresses that player and
yeah,
forces a response, draws them into a response. Um, the person comes up and taps them on the shoulder, the person bumps into them while they're walking by on the street, or that's the if you draw them into the trigger uh directly every now and again, it gives them the space to
yeah,
do that. But there
absolutely,
are players who are just quiet and they're
yeah,
comfortable with that,
yeah,
and that's one of the things Madrino and I talked about in one of these that hasn't gotten published yet. But um yeah, there I'll steal some of his good points, and it's there are players that are fine sitting back and not taking the initiative in RP encounters, and but they'll take their part when they're doing stuff, and when it really matters, they want to get involved, and then they're basically just along for the ride the rest of the time. They take their part in combat, and otherwise they're good. um, like, if you got somebody who's consistently, even when you're addressing them, you don't feel like they're coming out of their shell, just chat with them outside of the session one on one and just say, hey, are you enjoying this? Is there anything I can do to change the game to make it engage you a little more, or are you good? And if they say they're good, it's cool.
yeah,
You're good.
and take them
You
at
don't.
face
It's
value.
not a problem. They can be
Right,
quiet.
yeah.
That's allowed.
That is something too that I would like to make sure that people understand, is that it's not necessary to force all your role players to hold the spotlight for the same time. If someone isn't comfortable doing that all the time, it doesn't mean that they're like a poor role player, or it doesn't mean that they're not into your game like the other people. Some people are kind of naturally quiet and don't tend to need to be in the spotlight to feel like they're taking part. Of course, then you get, like there are the role players that are quiet and they're on their phones, and there's almost nothing that you can do to get them involved.
Yeah,
Um,
if you've got somebody who's quiet
right,
and not engaging regularly, and you're like, hey, you gotta every single time you're trying to get their attention back whenever something's coming up, they're not noticing when it's their turn, stuff like that. That's a different problem than someone who's just not,
right,
trying to take the forefront
yes, yeah,
all the time. And that's something that at the end of the day you can't. Yeah, like you're saying, there's nothing you can do about that as a DM if they're
right,
not like if they're more interested in being on their phone than playing D&D. Then
yeah.
I mean, if it's disruptive,
This
then
is
there's really
kind
only
of
one solution, I guess. After you give them a conversation about it and tell them what to, that you how you want it to change, I guess. Yeah.
right.
But
But this is kind of a good point to bring in the if you're got certain parties, you can break all of these rules and still get people in, like have people
absolutely,
invested. If you have a party that is really good at immersing themselves, like in the role play itself, you can get away with having one person talk to the NPCs and everyone else stand back, because everyone else is basically like listening at the door, waiting to hear what the outcome is because they're invested in the outcome.
or like everybody knows that this person needs to do the talking here
Right.
because of their position outside of
Yes.
whatever. Blah, like it's yeah, there are absolutely parties that it's
Yeah.
not. You can spend 30 minutes with one person doing all the direction. You spend an hour because um, they're engaged in because they're invested in what happens
Right.
regardless of their personal involvement or something like that. So every table is definitely going to be different.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think that another thing in this, kind of vein that really drives people's attention is the immersion itself. Um, because like if you have, like your group of three role players are like involved in an in-depth role playing, you know, conversation with like the Duke or something of a country, and you're like, uh, you guys are all coming together and you're doing something, and then someone you has to get up and go to the restroom or something like that, or like breaks the immersion by like I don't know, like bringing up a joke or like off topic or saying something out of character, then you can get people that will take that pause to then check their phone. They're like, oh yeah, I'm actually role playing. I'm not actually sitting in the council chambers. I have this cell phone here. Oh, I've got a
Right.
text message. Now they're talking about Game of Thrones, so I don't really have to pay attention. And then, boom, bada boom, 10 minutes have
All of a
passed, and you
sudden,
have to
it's
get
yeah.
people back into the conversation to get them to take part. So,
Right.
like as a DM, I think that something that you can really help with immersion is playing out scenes with your whole party. Don't just have every interaction with a PC or an NPC be you describing what the NPC is doing. This is one of my biggest pet peeves, I guess, is like a DM, is when people are like, "Oh, the king says congratulations and offers you 1,000 gold. What do you say?" That's not going to get people immersed as if you're like, "Oh, good job, my brave adventurers. I have this giant chest of not cursed gold here for That's going to get people way more involved
Even if you're
than
not doing the voice, if you're
right.
directly addressing them
Yes,
and
like
saying,
con-
yes, good adventurers,
congratulations. Yes,
yeah, thank you for your service to my kingdom. How
yes,
they're much more likely to not only respond in kind, but to be like, oh shit, oh yeah, okay,
yeah,
like I'm role playing, like and yeah, and you keep that like immersion rolling.
yeah,
So I tend toward that as well. I think there are parties who aren't focused on that stuff, and then
right.
it's yeah, the dude's just giving us our reward and we're moving on to the next dungeon or whatever.
Yep.
Find out what your table wants and
Yes.
deliver that, and
Yeah.
you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that lends itself toward, at least yeah, if you've got that kind of consistency as far as yeah, when they're being addressed by a person in something that could be a meaningful engagement, like RP encounter or whatever, that you continue to do that or whatever, I guess. Up top,
Absolutely.
if you want me to address it in first person.
Yes, yes. I think that that is one of the biggest things that helps. Like in terms of me, my own toolbox, um, be basically being able to constantly address players in NPC rather than like showing or telling them rather than showing them. Or no, other way around. Yeah, showing them rather than telling them via NPC dialogue is such a good way to get people continue to be immersed in what you're doing. And I mean, honestly, you can get people immersed, that aren't in the room with a good NPC. Like people can be like, oh my goodness, this guy is like, the only one that talks normally in this town, or this is the only reasonable person we've found. People are gonna be like, oh man, yeah, I hope the rogue doesn't screw this up, or I hope this. You really want to give people a reason to stick around via their attention because they don't want to miss something, or they don't want to they want to get that. Mm.
I think that's like another kind of point or whatever that leads into more stuff like that is the yeah, kind of, I guess, it's a bit bigger and broader, but if you can, with plot points and stuff within an actual session, um you can kind of draw these things out. So if you leave a hook in one session and they don't address it, next session maybe they see some evidence of the fact that they've ignored that problem and it's growing or whatever. Or potentially, they do something and there's like a tangible benefit that they can see, like the neighborhood that they helped out will, favors them or whatever,
Yeah.
the people. There's I think if you can try and draw these things along, sort of the arcs, and connect the dots in a way that's sort of consistent and meaningful to engage the party regularly. They keep coming back to the same people to solve the problems that they were trying to solve last session or whatever. Um, that stuff helps people a ton too.
Yeah.
Uh, if it's not like incredibly episodic, everything's totally self-contained. It's like a sitcom. At the end of the session, everything's back to normal and good again. Um, the details don't matter as much, so it's easier for people to justify checking out in the
Yes.
middle of a session, I think, to themselves probably. So
Yeah.
that's yeah, and then even more generically is like setting pieces and things like that. Like if they're going to the same bar regularly, keep the barkeeper the same, keep
Yes.
the general description similar. Maybe the same kind of people tend to be in there. It's like always a sailor bar or whatever. Um, and yeah, if you can keep those little things going, it helps with this immersion. It makes it feel like it's a real kind of breathing dynamic setting or
Yeah.
whatever, that what they're doing, every action they take, there is this little ripple that goes out, um, and affects the world around them, I guess. So it's not just in a vacuum where they're slaying the monster and getting the gold and then it's
Right.
done. There's a whole town that's benefiting from them slaying that monster or whatever.
Unless that's your table, and that's
I mean, yeah,
just an eternal asterisk. You should
obviously,
do
yes,
this unless your table, doesn't like that, and then you should play to your table, play to your strengths. But yeah,
always.
yeah. So, all right, it's about 11:10. We've got the next like chunk of this conversation is going to be how to get people involved in combat, how to keep people involved when you're a fighter and all you do is whack twice and you got to sit through the 10-minute wizard turn. How do you as a DM
Yeah,
keep the fighter engaged without him checking his phone because on his turn he's just going to move 15 feet and whack whack.
good luck.
Good luck. Yes, we'll talk about some strategies, and but we are going to run our break video. I think that we're going to plug
Mhm.
at the end. I think that
Okay.
I like that. I like plugging at the end better than plugging before the break. So we're going to run our break video, and then we will be back in about 15 minutes to discuss how to involve people in combat. Stay tuned.
Not going to give you direction. They're going to drop hooks at you. Subtle, sometimes blatant, but they're just going to drop a bunch of hooks. You're in a pond, they're going to throw hooks at you. You do what you want to do. You're in a tavern. They will describe the innkeeper. They'll describe some of the patrons. They'll describe, the environment. They'll describe the band that's playing, the bard that's singing. Some, people are walking in. It's this time of day. What do you want to do? What do you want to do? In a sandbox, I want to talk to this person at this table. I want to talk to the barkeep. I want to look at the board. I want to take part in the band. I want to get drunk. I want to go start a business. You don't have any given direction. There's anywhere you can go.
If you're playing a module, for example, that's probably going to be a little bit more of a railroaded campaign, just because of the necessity of, if you're going to stick to this structure of plot advancement that's in the book, everybody's got to kind of understand and agree that, when a hook comes up that's clearly pointing toward this main plot line, we're all going to kind of go toward that. And I think that happens in sandbox games after a point as well. You get to a point where the party has dictated something's interesting to them, and then the DMs, backstopped that a little more and developed a couple more complications or conflicts that are centered around that aspect of the game. It's starting a business or whatever. That can start to become one of those greater arcs. Like, you can have a larger overarching plot that guides the action and still have room for stuff where you can go off and do silly things in the meantime, where maybe every single action isn't time dependent, so you've got some free time or downtime or whatever that lets you work more along those lines. And so obviously these aren't like a binary one or the other thing.
If you're new, generally you would lean towards a railroad side. It gives you more direction, because as a new player, you're not exactly sure what all of your options are. What can you do? What should you do? I mean, do you want to go and talk to somebody? Do you want a quest? Do you want to do nothing? Like, you don't know. You don't know. You're not given a list of things that you can do. As a player, depending on what you want to do, you need a DM that's going to be trying to run that type of game. If you want the direction, there's nothing wrong with that. If you want a story-driven direction, then that's fine. Find a DM that's doing that.
Right.
Clam season, and you know what that means. That's right, it's the Clam Festival, and clams are half off at King Custard's Bucket Palace. We got steamed clams, baked clams, stuffed clams, fried clams, and so much more clam-related food. You won't fucking believe what we do to clams here. Come on down this Saturday for clam karaoke, clam racing, and of course, bobbing for clams. Get there early for your free clam bib and a chance to meet King Custard.
And I think that railroad's tossed around, almost like a curse word as, in the
Yeah.
DMing world. And I think that if you're taking away your player's agency, that's bad. But if you're just all moving toward the same plot line, then there's nothing wrong with that. If everyone's agreeing that they're all interested in saving the world, they don't want to deal with the piddly little nonsense here in town. They want to go straight to the cataclysmic world-altering event stuff, and that's the storyline everyone wants to play. Then that's not like a failed DM thing or something like that. I guess it's not my leaning as a DM, but I definitely am more of the whatever, run around, start a business. I've got a game that they own about 6, and they've had to license them all, and they run an orphanage, and they've got all there's like 100 different little business interests that they're sticking fingers in, and to me that's a lot of fun. But I understand that there are players that are going to be like, oh my god, nothing's happening, like we don't we don't do anything, we haven't left this city in like 2 years, like
Railroad is tossed around as like a bad word, but I think that the main reason that is because I think a majority of people that play, a majority of players end up falling into a certain category of where they want to play the game because they want their characters to be able to do what they want. And so when you have these players joining into games with DMs that want to run, say, a strict module or a straightforward, save the world campaign where it is a little more railroady, you have players that are joining games that they're not a fit for. Right. So then you end up with the railroad being a bad term. Now, if you have players that's what they want, that's your type of game, you're joining a DM because you know he's running a game that is story driven, that is pretty much railroad centric, a module, what have you, then that's fine. There's nothing wrong with railroad, but it gets a bad rap because just like any term in D&D, and where you're talking about any type of player or any type of DM, the only reason they get a bad rap is because the players and the DMs are not a good fit for each other. And that's what we're trying to talk about, is to get your fit as a player, as a DM. If you find your fit, there is no bad word.
Right. If you are doing some sort of like greater plot arc development stuff, and even if it's individual running around nonsense, eventually the stakes have to get raised, the pressure has to be increased in some way, and that there are people who are going to call that railroad. I think that it is part of pushing the plot forward at some point. I think that's it's much more important that everyone's looking for the same kind of game, because what one DM does and gets called railroading by one player, another DM could do with another player and never hear the same word, because they were both looking for that kind of game at the time.
So you're a bard, a master of performance, a suave, debonair gentleman with quick fingers and a silver tongue. But did you know that 8 out of every 10 bards have come in contact with a fantasy STD during their adventures without even knowing it? Have you recently experienced any of the following unexplained symptoms? Unending urination, warts with consciousness, sprouted tentacles, genital wings, crawling rash, anal portals, molten discharge? If so, you need Dr. Ungwin's Bard Rub, the only ointment on the market specifically designed for the most polyamorous of bards and adventurers. Most users see a 50% decrease in symptoms in just 2 applications, so don't wait for those tentacles to grow to maturity. Contact your nearest apothecary or witch doctor and tell them you need Dr. Ungwin's Bard Rub. Bard rub has not been reviewed by the Safe Ointment Board. Side effects of Bard rub include genital petrification, chemical burns, incontinence, and in some rare cases, death. Bard rub is not to be used in conjunction with any other product from Dr. Ungent, including Ungwent bath salts and Ranger eye cream.
Are you one of millions of adventurers who have suffered from dagger-infested dungeons? Are you a shopkeeper with a cellar full of wild pythons? Are you a bard trying to seduce a Medusa? Then I have the product for you. Dr. Josiah Mason here with Snake Begone Oil. Just one drop of this revolutionary product will have you saying, gee, all the snakes are gone. Because that is exactly what will happen. Anacondas? Gone. Giant vipers? Gone. Water naga, spirit naga, bone naga, gone, gone, gone. Snake Begone Oil will even work on a Medusa. Yes, any snake or snake-related creature that comes within 100 meters will be miraculously repelled in an instant. It's that fast. Those snakes won't know what hit them when you use Snake Begone Oil. Don't wait, get yours today.
Snake Begone oil has not been tested by the King's Alchemist or any royal authority. Snake Begone oil should not be used as a replacement for combat, pest control, or as a marital aid. Gnomes who are pregnant or nursing should avoid contact with Snake Begone oil. Snake Begone oil has not been proven to repel snakes of any kind. All sales final.
How should players go about determining what kind of style their prospective DM might be looking to implement?
From a player's perspective, there are some questions you should be asking your DM. The setting is a big deal. If you are talking to a DM who's running a setting that all their players, they're going to be joining sort of a guild or a company or a group of people that are like say a den of thieves or a pirate's ship or something. That gives you an idea sort of for the setting. Are they running a module? Are they running homebrew? Are they running some sort of mix? Are they using a pre-made world? Is it their homebrew world? And that'll give you sort of an idea of what they want to do. So what you need to find out is, are the sessions going to be encounter driven? I guess that's the best way to put it. Because asking them, hey, look, is every session going to be combat, or are we going to have opportunities to roleplay? It seems straightforward, but the main thing is, are they building their game to be encounter driven? If a DM is building their game to be encounter driven, then most of the time, not all the time, most of the time it's going to be that you need to defeat these encounters to progress.
Right.
That tends to let you know that it's going to be more combat oriented. Some DMs, and you need to ask them this question: can you solve, will they allow you to solve encounters or even combat encounters?
Right.
Can you solve these problems with roleplay?
Yeah.
Do you have that option if your reasoning and your roles line up? Can
Right.
you solve these things with roleplay? If the answer is yes, then they're allowing for more roleplay. If the
Right.
answer is no, which is fine,
Yep.
you're going to have to fight. That means
Yeah.
they want more combat. And I've been in games where I felt, as a charismatic character, that I could persuade some certain bad guys.
Right.
But the DM had the mindset that, hey,
This is
we have to
we
have
rolled
combat
initiative. Yeah,
because it
right.
needs to be exciting.
Yes. Oh no, that's what I was saying. Is that's a really good way to phrase that, or to like come at that, is by saying, hey, so how often will I be able to talk my way out of whatever
Yes.
mess we find ourselves in, or you know, think my way out of, or you know, because my answer to that is, hey, if it's reasonable, like you're saying, and the dice line up and all that stuff, yeah, do it.
Yeah,
Whatever.
yeah.
There are no guaranteed combats, right? But I think there are DMs who are going to say, well, there's going to be some situations where you're fighting, the giants in this are just savage, mean monsters.
Yeah.
And they don't want to hear it, and they're not going to talk with you. And that's what you're fighting a lot of the time. So there aren't going to be a lot of situations where maybe you can, convince them that it's not worth fighting or that there's a better alternative. And
Yeah.
and I think that is like a really important piece of information to get, and a good way to start to kind of figure out where your DM is as far as players
Yeah.
are concerned.
And like I said, there's no right or wrong. It's just
Yeah.
it's just finding your fit. It's finding your group. All of it's viable, all of it's fun. But if you want a combat oriented game and the DM is not doing that, or
Right.
vice versa, you're going to end up with some issues.
That makes sense.
You're going to end up not having fun, and that's the whole point of it.
That's not great.
And we're back. Hello. This is Table 13. We are Rational Radio. So we have been talking about how to keep your role players invested in what is going on in front of them in the tabletop game. Some of the things we've already discussed are good pre-campaign prep, making sure you have a good group that knows how to work together, making sure you have a setting that can be imagined in people's heads on a consistent basis, and making sure that you yourself are invested in the campaign or setting or story that you want to tell. No one wants to play a game with a DM who doesn't care. Yes. And then we talked about things that you can do within the campaign itself while it's going on to keep players invested, such as cutting down on splitting parties. If you split parties, make sure each group has some sort of tangible goal or conflict to resolve, and then spend energy switching back and forth between those two things in order to make sure everyone feels loved, cared for, and respected. Of course, all of these things with a giant asterisk, because this is your own table. It can be whatever you want to. As long as everyone's having fun, it doesn't matter. But in our experience, these are the things that lead to fun. So, with that out of the way, what possibly more could there be to talk about? Well, one of the biggest things that I have found that cause people to check out within role-playing or within D&D, I should say specifically D&D combat or turn-based RP with a lot of mechanics involved, is combat. Because people will take their turn and then spend upwards of 15 to 20 minutes standing there waiting for the rest of the party to act.
Before they get to go again.
Before they get to go again. Without...
And all the enemies and everything.
Right, exactly. So, how do you keep players from picking up their phone and jumping into Reddit or Facebook while they're waiting for their turn to swing their longsword twice? Well, we've got a few answers for you. Potentially, yes. A few options, a few opinions, yes. A few opinions. Well, we're gonna kind of go back to what we talked about at the beginning of the video, which is do some pre-campaign work, do some pre-session work. Make sure that everyone has an idea of what their character sheet does, what it is, what their character can do, how their character can do the things that their character can do, and in what situations would abilities, effects, and spells be most useful. Because that's going to cut down on your spellcaster's time a lot. If they know their spell book, they know what each spell does mechanically, they're going to be able to look at a situation and then be like, this spell is going to work way better.
Right.
And this even goes to like martial classes. You know, if you're a fighter and you don't, or like you're a battle master and you don't know your battle master maneuvers, you're just gonna want to swing rather than use your abilities, or you're gonna miss out and be like, oh, I could have used this ability at this point instead of swinging twice.
Or, you know, the worst things or at least one of my biggest pet peeves is like, I guess, you know, this applies to spellcasters as well, but it's the like trying to use things based on their name rather than the mechanics. Right. When it's like, oh, it should work like this because it's called this, but it's like, you know, there's spells like Chill Touch, which don't do cold damage and aren't touch spells. So you can't like, read something's title and then be like, okay, I know how that works. Because there are weird, hinky, like you're saying, the mechanic specifics of maneuvers and things like that, if you're running into the repeated issues of the same stuff, trying to explain it over and over again, you're going to lose other players' attention during those sort of moments where you got to be like, well, that's not really what that does or whatever. but I think that, but that goes to what you're saying is just, make sure that people have a good grasp on what their abilities do and what you're going to allow them to do. So how much
Right.
leeway they have with that mechanical description and what it, reliably is going to be able to do outside of that, if anything, and things of those sorts. And then, obviously the very basic mechanics of D&D stuff.
Right.
Everybody needs to know how their turn works. And all
Or of
that.
any system, really. I mean,
Yeah,
I
sure.
think one of the worst things, or not, obviously not the worst, but it's something that does not help player immersion, especially at the beginning of sessions of campaigns, because this kind of thing really, as the campaign goes on, the less and less, you hope, the less and
Right.
less it causes disruption. But at the beginning, I think one of the, like, if you're a new role player or if you're a DM with a new group of role players, one of the worst things you can do is like run combat and then like try to teach them their character sheet through the combat.
I disagree wholeheartedly.
Okay, all right.
I think that's the best way. I do. If it's people who've never played D&D before, a tavern brawl is like the tutorial fight to like, okay, here's how your shit works. Oh, you want to throw somebody through the window? Well, here's how grapple works. Like, and you can do. So I do see what you're saying. It's going to bog that combat down. That combat's going to drag.
Right.
But the hope is that if you do it right the first time, you're not going to have to keep doing it every session thereafter. Because I was going to say, with new players, there's a huge asterisk here, because as long as everybody knows that somebody's a new player, they don't know the system yet, or that everyone's a new player, so nobody's comfortable with the system yet. This stuff you're not going to lose players as much, hopefully, because they're going to be interested in learning whatever mechanic it is you're explaining at the time as well. So,
Right.
for me, I think that that's maybe not as critical. I don't mean to totally just horn in.
No. I think that you make good points. Yeah, absolutely.
But on the other side of that, if you've got a group of people who it's just one person who's not familiar with the rules and everybody else there wasn't expecting to be playing with the newbie, starting with combat is maybe not your best
Right.
choice. As far as maybe work with them outside of it to try and get them up to speed, as far as with the basics of their character, and get them, to where everybody else is, or whatever, at least to the point where they can handle their turns on their own, sort of deal.
And I do also, this works at low levels better than at high levels too. Because if you're running like a level 15 campaign and the people don't know how their shit works, you're gonna, each turn is gonna be 15 minutes long. Because
if you, for example, even experienced players, if you start your campaign with level 15 characters, that first combat's going to be a slog, because everybody's going to be like, okay, how does my character exactly actually work? And at the table, there's so many pieces and gears moving at that point, that I definitely, if you've got like a new player, I would definitely say you're going to have better luck with their future engagement if you start at lower levels, so they can kind of build their way into the complexity rather than just being blindsided by 100 different choices that they have to make every time they take a turn, kind of thing.
Right. Absolutely. Because that's just going to slow everything down, and that's just going to, again, you want to get people invested in spite of themselves, and combat is really hard to do that unless you have some kind of engagement that is beyond just the numbers on the die or the numbers on the character sheet. So it's a good segue to kind of the next thing we were going to talk about here is, even if you have characters, people that know their character sheets backwards and forwards, there is still boring combat. There is still combat that DMs can run that isn't very interesting. And what I mean by that is like, a lot of the caster classes can take turns that are crazy complicated. They have a lot of different like steps in their turn. There exist spells high levels obviously, but it exists like time stop, where you can have the wizard taking 4 turns in one time.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. Whereas and this is especially true of 5th level to 10th level, where your casters are starting to really blossom and do a lot of different things, where your commercial classes are just getting the second attack, just getting the ability to wear heavy armor without taking minuses. They're just getting into the ability to deal damage and take damage, but that is boring in terms of like complexity
Right.
or role playing.
Yeah, they're still just going to be taking the attack action and maybe moving or
Right.
something for most of their turns,
Yeah.
probably. And I
Where-
think that's something to try and insulate yourself against. To at least if you can keep combat from being just a like a hit point based slog where
Right.
you got to drop all the meat points of every enemy on the board to get out of this conflict. But instead there's some other sort of like objective to
Right.
accomplish, then and then the combat's sort of secondary. Maybe it's not incredibly threatening, but there's a time limit because this thing's gonna this ship's pulling out of the dock or something. So if you can't get to the point to stop it or something along those lines, it's that that's bags.
Yeah, that's a good idea
I
too.
think
Yeah.
that's another. I love doing that as well. You give people, totally derailing, but giving people a NPC to protect that's weaker than them in a combat is another way to
Yeah.
make a combat and give it an objective that isn't, just about dropping the meat points. Maybe again, it's
Right.
maybe not a super complicated, difficult encounter for the party, but they're able to target the really weak players, so there's a ton of effort that has to go into protecting them or ensuring that they're not targeted or
Yeah.
whatever. And or any number of other things where maybe the most optimal action for the fighter isn't swinging their sword all
Right.
of a sudden. You can put them in a position where thinking and solving a problem, because they tipped over the crane or something like that.
Mhm.
There's other ways to interact with the situation that they're in to give them a tangible, meaningful benefit in the situation. I would say, and that stuff can help a lot, I suppose.
I agree. Yeah, I think that it is incredibly important, especially for like groups too that maybe can be a little combat heavy. Because I think like D&D at its base, like if you just open like the monster manual and stuff, it looks like there is tons of variety in the monsters that you can fight. But at the end of the day, they're basically just bags of points. It's up to
Right.
you to make those encounters more than just the bag of points. And like we said, one of the major things you can do is use those as just pieces of the combat scenario rather than the main focus of it. Um, uh, and or give the combat a way to be solved in ways that aren't just reducing the thing's hit points to 0. Such as
Right.
like convincing the evil wizard through dialogue to drop the spell, or like to stop summoning these creatures, or to close the portal, or you have to unload a set of boxes while this building is on fire, while at the same time fighting the goblins that started the fire in the first place. That way there is a focus not only the role players have, but also the NPCs that they're fighting, is that there's something else for the NPCs to do besides just smack the players too.
Right.
Because that really does create more drama in the situation, more engagement for everybody,
Right.
including you as the DM too, because I've run combat as the DM. It's boring for me, even, just like, oh my god, I'm just moving these 16 goblins, and it's just a meat grinder.
It's
just
it's a slog.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing, is you just want to, that's where you're going to lose players in combat, is where it's okay, I guess I'll do this and I'll attack, and that'll be that kind of thing. And if you've got to do that 4 or 5 turns in a row where all you do is stand there and swing your sword at somebody, and because there's really not another way that you can meaningfully impact the encounter you're dealing with or whatever, that's when you're going to find your players starting to check out or whatever, I think. And it's hard to avoid sometimes. That's a lot of the way D&D combat's set up. So it really does take some sort of lateral thinking as far as your setting up the circumstances of combat is concerned. I find that it's best to have the difficulty of the combat be less important than sort of the consequences of like being able to successfully complete whatever side tactic there is. Combat's a thing, and if it keeps getting worse, the guards are going to show up, and it's going to be like a problem where now you've got to run away, and it's this whole other set of situations maybe, but that it's just another problem or another hurdle to get over in the process of accomplishing whatever goal it is that they want, rather than you need every session there's got to be a random encounter kind of thing. I think that's also another place that DMs can find themselves getting into trouble, is when you're forcing combat because you feel like it's been too long since the last time you fought or whatever, or you just didn't prep well enough for your session or something, and you want to stoke up a couple hours, which I would never do ever. But that's, I think, that's one of those things that can really help a ton combat wise, is just focusing on something other than hit points as an objective.
So along with that, you can run, or I guess like at the end of the day too, it's up to you as the DM to add flavor to the combat that in just description as well. Because even if you've done all this stuff and you're just like, the goblin hits you for 26 points of damage, it's going to be less cinematic and therefore less interesting, or less like, you want people to want to listen to what's going on instead of just getting an update, on their turn. Like, oh, Frank did 20 points of damage to the goblin and Greg blinded him with blindness deafness. So we need you to, run the area of effect DPS or something like that. And, that's not going to engage people on other people's turns as it is if you're like, he swung his mighty great axe twice, cleaving the goblin in twain, while Edward the wizard wove a powerful spell with his fingers that took the sight away from the other goblin. His eyes grew dim and he screamed, clawing at his eyelids. I'm gonna pay attention and listen to that. It's a little bit more skill based than some of the other things that we have talked about, because that's just kind of a thing you got to get yourself into, is descriptive dialogue. It's the same thing I put in like the category of voices. It's not absolutely necessary, but it is a skill that has huge benefits if you practice it just a little bit. As the DM, it is so rewarding to be able to involve people in the combat through weaving a picture that people want to like listen to, or be like, oh dude, that's gnarly, like, oh man, that was fucking crazy, that kind of thing. And if you got a silver enough tongue, you can make every single interaction have at least a little bit more flavor than just like what Braggs said up there. It's your turn. You have 3 damage notifications. Yes.
One new condition status update.
Oh yes. Oh dear, I've been stunned. How droll. You'd want to avoid that.
I think on the same token or whatever, by the same token as with voices, I think a little bit goes a long way. You don't have to have some hugely eloquent description like you just rattled off that sounded prepared there, but like if you even get like a couple sentences of, which I know it wasn't, but still, it's like you don't have to be able to make such a poetic stream like as that to still get some pretty serious benefit from this. If you even go from the goblin deals 24 damage with his spear to he runs you through, and you see the guy standing behind him, you see this the back of his armor bow out as the point of the spear pokes against it or something like that. That suddenly has drawn them in significantly more than just the damage.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a huge, eloquent, fantastic thing. Just like you don't have to have a fantastic like Cockney accent or something. If you even alter your
Right.
voices a little bit, you can draw people in. I think it's
So
similar mentality.
there is a exercise that an ex of mine developed to help me practice this. That's actually a lot of fun.
Okay.
That I think that we should do. All right.
Okay.
So what you
I'm
do
nervous.
is I don't necessarily have the table
This
in
was
front
not
of me.
prepared.
Right. No, it's not prepared. I'm throwing this because that's kind of the point. All right. So what you do here is I'm going to come up with tell you a weapon and how many points of damage that weapon did to a target. You're going to give me a description, and then the adjectives that you use, you can't use the next description. So if you said the
Oh, boy.
scimitar sliced through the goblin, you can no longer use sliced. You have to use
Okay.
another word to describe the next attack. Okay? So the first one is
Alright.
going to be a dagger that does 2 points of damage.
I guess I'll just do you and them
Sure,
or
there you
whatever.
go.
So
Yeah.
you lunge forward and nick their wrist, opening up a small wound or something. along
Okay.
those lines.
You can't use lunge or nicked.
Okay.
All
Or
right.
open, I suppose. Probably.
Or open, yeah. Okay, so then
Verbs, not adjectives.
next one is an axe that does 10 points of damage.
All right. Yeah, you I guess 10 points. Yeah, you cleave into the spot where his shoulder meets his where his shoulder meets his neck and not open. Yeah, I guess separate the meaty bits a touch here and draw a nice line down. Line
Yep.
down his
Yep,
chest.
yep.
Sure.
That's fine, yeah. All right, next one
It's
is
tougher
a
than it seems like it's gonna
spear
be after this one.
that does 5 points of damage. You can no
Alright.
longer use lunged, nicked, open, cleave, or separate.
Gotcha. All right. You let's see. So it it plunges through the bracer of your enemy, and I guess
Yep.
okay, it sticks out the backside. I don't have to say. It's tough. Once you get past
Yep.
the first couple, it's like, man,
it's hard and
starting to struggle through
Yep, it'll
different things. And
You
like,
realize how many times you've said the man swung the sword. When
Sure,
you
yeah,
can only use swung once, and then you're like, oh shit. I think I've gotten up to 8 or 9 descriptions.
mhm.
Before you're just basically saying, the
Like really
man
weird words to try and
whomped the man whomped the dude badly. Like it's
Yeah.
really, really difficult.
starting to stretch to like, oh god, I don't know enough words here.
Right.
But
And
yeah,
so
you
then you can
know.
kind of target and be like, okay, what is some synonyms for cleave? What is some synonyms
Mhm.
for cut that will like kind of open doors for you here? And the more you do this, and you can do this by yourself. If you
Right.
just go to a table, a weapons table, and you just take a d20 and you roll it, and you're just like, okay, this, and then you roll that weapon's damage. And like if it's like the lowest number, you can be like, oh, just barely a graze. But if it's a really high number, it's like a serious wound that weapon can do.
Sure.
And you just keep track of the words you use. You're going to be like, oh no, okay, this is an interesting way to describe a wound that I wouldn't have thought of, that you can bring to the table next time, where people are like, oh, that description was horrifying. Why did you do that to that man?
It was I didn't want to go as ham as I took go in my Sunday game. I tend to go fairly grotesque, and if I haven't heard a player go or ew, I feel I've failed in describing combat damage. But But you got to know your table. You don't want
Right.
to do that with the wrong group
Right,
of people.
right.
It's people I know I'm comfortable with, and
Yeah,
don't,
exactly.
or aren't gonna respond too negatively. It's just the right amount of grossing them out. But that's one of my favorites. Is just when you're actually dismantling people with
Yeah.
damage. You got the people who are doing like 30 or 40 in one swing and taking up somebody down to half, and they're about to die next turn. You can have some
Ham it
fun and
up,
make
yeah.
people feel bad for
Really
doing the
bad.
damage.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Spraying people with blood and stuff. That's always fun. I've got one of my characters. He has to keep replacing his frilly shirts because of getting run through
Oh.
and
That's-
getting coated in blood.
That's another thing that you can do that I did for Dragon's Paralandia for large scale combat is like when you have large groups of like basically stormtroopers or like name them names because they will you will create a whole like I had a entire
have a
like
person all of a
platoon
sudden.
of bandits, like 42 bandits, and they were all named after the good deeds they'd done in their life. And so they were like, all right, I'm going to slice into Calls' mother on the weekend, dealing 18 damage. Oh no, I'm going to have to cut into Walks his dog on a regular basis now. Like, yeah, it was...
Loves gardening.
Yeah.
I'm going to finish,
he's
running
dead
him
now.
through
Yeah.
here. Yeah, exactly. It's good.
Oh, man.
Anything...
Yeah.
You can get just enough of that, like that emotional tug on your players. Like, really, that's capital. That's the investment. Even if they don't want to, if you can get them to care on that level, they'll then care about the actions they're taking a little bit more. And so it's it's a little manipulative, but that's the game.
That's the game. Yeah, you want that's what we've been saying this whole episode. You want them to have fun in spite of themselves. You want them to forget their phone is there. You don't want them to be like, oh, I can't pick that up. Don't pick that up. Whoa. Because they're not in the game. They're just basically playing you lip service. You want them to be like, oh shit, it's been an hour and a half. I have a missed call. Like,
oh god, yeah, like shit, the session's over already. Man, that's holy crap.
That's what you want.
Ideally.
Yeah. And so I think that's a great place to end it here. I think that if you
one thing real quick, that's ending sessions. I was just gonna say that's one thing that you can do. I think that'll really help if when you're ending a session, if you can try and end, if not on a cliffhanger, but at a point where you have introduced some new source of tension that has not yet been resolved, that is like a present threat, or at least allude to a current threat that is maybe getting worse or becoming more imposing or more imminent. That can absolutely put you in a position where next time you've got people who are just dying to get started on the next session. They don't want to stop this one. That helps you a ton in keeping the investment into the next session.
Because that's a good point too. You want people to remain invested between sessions just as much as you want people to remain invested in the session itself. So that's an excellent point there.
You got to look at it as kind of like your classic procedural dramas or whatever. Or your supernatural type. The shows that go for hundreds and hundreds of episodes. That's how they keep you going. Is they draw you in. There's a main arc of the episode, and then at the end, there's something that either says, hey, this problem wasn't solved the way they thought it was. There's this added complication they didn't realize, or an unintended consequence, or there's this thing that's been looming in the shadows that takes one step closer to being an imminent threat.
Or of course, you have also at the threshold. If they're getting ready to storm the castle, you don't always have to be like, oh, now it can always be just like, okay, we've spent 3 sessions. Next session, we're doing it. Next session, we're gonna rob that bank or something like that.
Adding a session with an initiative roll, if you can do it with that too. That's another one that's like, okay, roll initiative. All right, and we're gonna call it there. We'll come back with the start of combat next session.
Yeah,
that's
my Sunday group. They got the game ended with a giant purple claw. Or like clawed hand bursting through the wall in front of them, and I was like, and the session is over, and they're like, boom. Oh my god,
what now? Yeah,
Jesus.
you've won as a
Yeah,
DM. If you can get one of
exactly.
your players to be like, "Oh man, no!"
Or of course you
Yeah.
did. That's also a good
Yeah,
one. I
or
like
you
that,
son
yeah.
of a bitch.
You
Yeah,
fucking
some
dickhead.
sort of cursing you
Yeah.
out. Yeah, that's me. By the way, I
Yeah,
always
yeah,
do that.
yeah,
I
yeah.
apologize.
Good stuff.
But
But
yeah, now we can probably.
All right. Well,
wind
this
up
has
if you
been
wanna
an
do that.
Irrational Radio production, Table 13. We do this every Thursday at 10:30 Central Standard Time. Check us out. We talk about role playing stuff. We do interviews from people big in the community of role playing. We discuss tips, tricks, things that you can do to make your game better, make your players more invested, and make you yourself better as a player in some respects as well. We also have a few other we have one other streamed product right now, which is Old for Gold, which runs on Mondays at 9:30 Central Standard Time. Check them out. Both I run that game, and Mr. E over there, he takes part in it, much to his chagrin.
No,
No,
I enjoy it a
yeah, it's
lot.
of fun.
Actually,
Yeah.
it's a ton of fun.
And then we also have a Discord that you can join, that is linked below there, both on, if you're watching this on YouTube or now live on Twitch. Check us out there. We will answer your questions. We have a big loving community that just absolutely loves new people. We help set up games. We have a Patreon game as well, which you can get into if you love us enough to throw us some bucks. I run a Patreon only game that you'll be invited to. In fact, we're building a new one right now, so get in on that if you want to jump in on the ground floor of the second Patreon game. Other than that, we also have a podcast that has been completed. It is 2 seasons long, and it is going to serve as a lead up to a new streamed product that we are going to release in March. We're looking at sometime near the beginning of March for that release, and we will have a more solid date for you here coming up soon as to when you can check that out for the first day. But other than that, thank you very much for being here and taking part in this lovely stream or watching us on YouTube. Again, this has been Irrational Radio, and this has been Table 13. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.
Visit our website. Buy
yeah.
stuff.
Visit our website, of course. Yeah, irrationalradio.io. We always forget something
Also.
at the end. Every I gotta put a big sign or something.
That's what I gotta write it all down and tack it
yeah.
to the wall in front of me. Otherwise I'll never
With
remember.
string connecting each sticky note, and
Why are you attacking me?
yeah. All right, guys. Have a good night. We will see you on Monday. Goodbye.